A simple woman returned as a billionaire's bride after humiliation at a bridal boutique. The words hung in the air like broken glass as Dorothy Andrews stood frozen in the center of Eternal Elegance, the most exclusive bridal salon in the city. All eyes were on her, witnessing her shame. "I think you've mistaken this establishment for a department store, dear." Cheryl Peachy's voice cut through the silence, dripping with disdain. "Perhaps you should stick to looking at dress catalogs instead. These gowns start at prices I'm sure you couldn't even imagine." Dorothy's cheeks burned as laughter rippled through the boutique. The beautiful ivory dress she'd been admiring moments before suddenly felt like a costume she had no right to touch. She hadn't even meant to be trying on dresses. She was only here to support her pregnant friend who had rushed to the bathroom with morning sickness, leaving Dorothy alone when Cheryl mistook her for the bride. From across the room, a pair of intense eyes watched the scene unfold. William Hadlock stood perfectly still, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the boutique's polished floor. Have you ever felt completely out of place somewhere you weren't wanted? Have you ever had that moment when you realized someone was looking down on you, judging every inch of who you are and finding you lacking? If you have, stay with me because this story might just heal something inside you that you didn't know was broken. Like this video if you've ever been underestimated, and subscribe to Genie Soul Stories for more tales that will touch your heart in places you keep hidden from the world. Dorothy clutched her worn leather purse to her chest and turned to leave, dignity in tatters. She was nothing here, just a simple baker who had wandered too far from her world of flour-dusted countertops and the comforting scent of vanilla. "Wait!" The deep voice halted everyone in the room. William Hadlock stepped forward, the billionaire whose name graced buildings all over the city. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Little did Dorothy know that this moment of humiliation would be the beginning of a story so unexpected, so filled with twists and emotional revelations, that it would transform her life forever. And little did she suspect that she would one day return to this very boutique, not as the same woman who left in shame, but as a billionaire's bride who had earned every bit of her happy ending. Dorothy Andrews had always been able to tell love stories through cake. That was her gift, creating wedding cakes that somehow captured the essence of each couple's unique journey. "You can taste their story in every bite," clients would marvel. Yet her own love story had crumbled years ago, leaving behind nothing but crumbs of doubt and insecurity. Her small bakery, Sweet Promises, sat on a quiet street corner, beloved by locals but perpetually teetering on the edge of financial collapse. The morning after the boutique incident, Dorothy opened her shop with trembling hands, still shaken by the public humiliation. The memory of those judging eyes made her scrub the counters harder than necessary, as if she could erase the shame along with the flour dust. Dorothy had never felt like she belonged in this wealthy coastal town. Growing up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat, she had learned early that some doors weren't meant for people like her to walk through. Her mother had taught her to find beauty in simple things, the perfect rise of a souffle, the delicate balance of flavors in a lemon cream. "We might not have much," her mother would say, "but we have enough love to flavor a lifetime." That love had carried Dorothy through, even when Anthony Melton walked into her life 6 years ago. The handsome heir had swept her off her feet during a summer that felt like someone else's fairy tale. Dorothy had believed him when he said her background didn't matter, that he loved her uniqueness. Then one day he simply vanished, leaving nothing but a short note. "This could never work. We're from different worlds." Those words had confirmed every insecurity lodged in Dorothy's heart. She wasn't enough. Would never be enough for someone born into wealth and privilege. Since then, she had poured all her passion into her baking, creating perfect love stories for others while convincing herself she didn't need one of her own. As she placed fresh pastries in the display case, the bell above the door chimed. Dorothy looked up, expecting her first customer of the day. Instead, she found herself staring into the penetrating gaze of William Hadlock, the billionaire who had witnessed her humiliation yesterday. And something told her his appearance in her small bakery was about to change everything. William Hadlock hadn't always been a billionaire. But he'd always been alone, even in crowded rooms filled with people claiming to care about him. The son of prominent old-money socialites, William had grown up in a mansion so large that his footsteps echoed down marble hallways. His parents had been more concerned with appearances than affection, leaving emotional warmth out of his education entirely. Where other children had bedtime stories and scraped knees, William had etiquette lessons and expectations. Where others had playgrounds, he had antique furniture he wasn't allowed to touch. This upbringing had shaped him into a man who understood the value of things rather than people, until he discovered historic architecture. In crumbling walls and forgotten spaces, William found something that spoke to his soul. These neglected buildings had stories to tell, character etched into every crack and crevice. At 34, he had built Heritage Holdings into a billion-dollar company that transformed abandoned historic properties into luxury hotels and event venues, preserving their stories while giving them new purpose. His brief marriage to socialite Linda Boucher had been a strategic merger rather than a love match. She had brought connections. He had brought wealth. When she left him 2 years ago, complaining about his obsession with old buildings nobody cares about, William had felt relief rather than loss. The divorce had only reinforced his belief that relationships, like business deals, were ultimately transactional. Standing in Dorothy's small bakery now, William remembered the first time he had tasted one of her creations. 3 years ago, at the grand opening of the Hartwick Hotel, his first major restoration project, someone had ordered a custom cake from an unknown local baker. One bite of that cake had stayed with him, honey-laced vanilla with unexpected notes of rosemary and orange, somehow capturing the essence of the historic building itself. Looking at her now, flour dusting her cheek, brown eyes wide with surprise, William recognized more than just the baker. He saw someone who, like his beloved buildings, contained depths and stories that others might miss. And for reasons he wasn't ready to examine, he couldn't forget the look on her face at Cheryl Peachy's boutique yesterday. "Mr. Hadlock," Dorothy stammered, wiping her hands on her apron. "What brings you here?" William adjusted his perfectly tailored suit, a man clearly out of place among the homey scents and mismatched chairs of sweet promises. "I have a proposition for you, Ms. Andrews," he said, his voice measured and controlled. "One that might benefit us both considerably." Dorothy couldn't believe what she was hearing. William Hadlock, the William Hadlock, was standing in her tiny kitchen, proposing the most outlandish arrangement she could imagine. "Let me understand this," she said, setting down her rolling pin. "You want me to pretend to be your fiancé for 3 months to help you secure a business deal? And in return, you'll provide capital for my bakery and introduce me to high-end clients?" William's expression remained impassive, as if he were discussing the weather rather than a fake engagement. "Precisely," he nodded. "The Montgomery family is old-fashioned and values traditional partnerships. Their properties are essential for my next preservation project. They're more likely to sell to a man with stable family prospects. And you chose me because—" Dorothy couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. A flicker of something, perhaps discomfort, crossed William's face. "You create exceptional cakes. Your work demonstrates attention to detail and understanding of emotional nuance. These are valuable qualities for the role." Dorothy almost laughed. Trust a billionaire to make even a fake relationship sound like a business assessment. But behind his clinical explanation, she sensed something more, a motivation he wasn't sharing. "There's something else, isn't there?" she pressed. William's jaw tightened. "The engagement announcement will be at an event Cheryl Peachy is catering. Our wedding planning taken elsewhere would significantly damage her reputation in certain circles." Understanding dawned. "So I'm your revenge against Cheryl for yesterday. Consider it a mutually beneficial arrangement. You gain financial security. I secure my business deal." Dorothy glanced around her beloved but struggling bakery. Last month's rent was overdue, and supplies were getting more expensive. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. "What would I have to do exactly?" she asked, hating the desperation in her voice. "Attend events. Look convincingly enamored. Learn enough about me to be believable. Nothing inappropriate. he added stiffly. Dorothy thought of her mother's words. Sometimes, sweetheart, you have to dance with opportunity even when you don't like the song. 3 months, she said finally. Not a day longer. And I want everything in writing. William extended his hand. We have an agreement then. As Dorothy placed her small hand in his much larger one, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made a deal with a devil in a bespoke suit, a devil with eyes that somehow looked as lonely as she felt. Dorothy's first public appearance as William Hadlock's fiancée came just 2 weeks later at the annual Heritage Foundation Gala. Wearing a midnight blue gown that cost more than 6 months of her rent, she felt like an imposter with every step. The whispers followed her across the ballroom. Who was she? Where had William found her? Was she worthy of one of the city's most eligible bachelors? The chandelier light seemed too bright, the music too loud, the stares too piercing. Dorothy's chest tightened as she smiled and nodded at names she would never remember. When William was pulled into a business conversation, panic clawed at her throat. She slipped away, desperate for a moment to breathe. She found refuge in a quiet library adjoining the ballroom. Among shelves of leather-bound books, Dorothy pressed her forehead against the cool glass of a window and tried to remember who she really was beneath this elegant stranger's clothes. The molding in this room dates back to 1887, William's voice came from behind her. Most people want to replace it with something more contemporary, but look at the hand-carved oak leaves. Someone spent weeks creating those, putting their heart into something they hoped would last. Dorothy turned, surprised not by his presence but by the genuine emotion in his voice. You really love old buildings, she said. They have character, stories. Worth that isn't immediately obvious. William ran his fingers along the woodwork. Modern replacements might be perfect, but they lack soul. In that moment, Dorothy saw past the billionaire facade to the man beneath, someone who valued what others might discard. She found herself sharing her own philosophy about baking. I feel that way about ingredients, she admitted. The imperfect strawberry often has the strongest flavor. The asymmetrical cake sometimes holds together better. William looked at her with new interest. Is that why your cake for the Hartwick opening was so memorable? You captured the building's essence somehow. Dorothy's eyes widened. You remember that cake? I spent days researching the building's history to create those flavor combinations. Honey, rosemary, and orange, William said without hesitation. Like sunshine through old windows. For the first time since their arrangement began, a genuine smile spread across Dorothy's face. Exactly like that. Something shifted between them, a moment of authentic connection in their carefully constructed charade. When William offered his arm to return to the gala, Dorothy took it with less reluctance. The whispers still followed them, but somehow they didn't sting quite as much. As weeks passed, their performances grew more convincing, perhaps too convincing. During dance lessons for their engagement party, Dorothy stepped on William's expensive Italian shoes and spilled red wine on his shirt. She braced herself for anger, for the mask to slip and reveal the cold businessman beneath. Instead, William threw his head back and laughed, a real laugh that reached his eyes and softened the perpetual crease between his brows. I haven't laughed like that in years, he admitted, looking almost surprised at himself. Well, I haven't ruined a $300 shirt in years, so I guess we're both breaking new ground, Dorothy quipped. William's expression grew serious. This perfect exterior. It's exhausting to maintain. Try being the imperfect one, always trying to measure up, Dorothy countered softly. They stood there, wine seeping into expensive fabric, suddenly seeing each other without pretense. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. Neither was prepared for how that moment would change everything. An engagement cake should tell your love story, Dorothy insisted when William suggested ordering from a renowned French pâtisserie. I'm still a baker, even if I'm temporarily masquerading as a socialite. Which was how William Hadlock found himself in Dorothy's modest apartment above her bakery, seated at a scratched wooden table for a cake tasting. He looked comically out of place, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the cozy, mismatched furniture. Dorothy placed 5 small cake samples before him. Each represents a chapter of our fictitious romance. William raised an eyebrow. You've created quite an elaborate backstory. People ask questions. I needed answers that felt true. Dorothy pointed to the first sample. Dark chocolate with subtle coffee notes. Your seriousness when we first met. William tasted it thoughtfully. Intense. Not overly sweet. The second is lemon and thyme. Sharp edges softened by unexpected warmth. That's when you started to let your guard down. With each sample, Dorothy revealed how deeply she'd observed him. His hidden humor, his passion for preservation, his carefully concealed loneliness. The final sample was dark chocolate again, but this time with bursts of salted caramel. Your seriousness remains, Dorothy explained, not meeting his eyes. But now there are moments of surprising sweetness that catch people off guard. William stared at her, something unreadable in his expression. No one had ever seen him so clearly. It was unsettling. It was wonderful. You have a gift, he said finally, his voice rougher than usual, for seeing beneath surfaces. Occupational hazard, Dorothy shrugged, trying to lighten the suddenly charged atmosphere. Bakers have to understand what flavors hide beneath others. But they both knew something was changing between them, something neither had anticipated in their carefully worded contract. That change became undeniable during dinner with William's parents. Eleanor and Richard Hadlock lived in a mansion that made William's substantial home look modest. Every surface gleamed with old money and older judgments. So Dorothy, Eleanor began, her smile never reaching her eyes. William tells us you're a baker? The way she said baker made it sound like street performer. Yes, Dorothy replied, keeping her voice steady. I specialize in wedding cakes. How quaint, Eleanor said. I suppose every little girl dreams of playing with flour and sugar. Richard barely acknowledged Dorothy throughout the meal, directing all questions to his son about business matters. Do you follow the market, Dorothy? Richard finally asked, clearly expecting a negative response. Actually, Dorothy replied, small business owners have to be quite savvy about economic trends. When luxury spending decreases, I adjust my offerings accordingly. William watched with growing admiration as Dorothy handled each subtle slight with grace and intelligence. When his mother made a pointed comment about suitable matches and appropriate backgrounds, he surprised himself by intervening. Dorothy understands more about genuine craftsmanship and artistic integrity than most people I know, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Her work requires both technical skill and emotional intelligence, a rare combination. Eleanor's eyebrows rose at her son's defense of this clearly unsuitable woman. Dorothy looked equally surprised. Later, as William drove them home in tense silence, Dorothy finally spoke. You didn't have to defend me. They had no right to judge you, William replied, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Parents always judge who their children bring home, Dorothy said softly. Mine would have judged you too, you know. My mother would have worried you'd break my heart. That you'd see me as temporary, a novelty that would wear off. William glanced at her. Would she have been right? The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been for two people in a business arrangement. I don't know, Dorothy admitted. This isn't real, remember? But something in the way William's jaw tightened made her wonder if they both were forgetting that crucial fact. Later that night, Dorothy found William standing before an old family photograph, looking uncharacteristically vulnerable. He told her about growing up in emotional isolation, about parents who saw him as an extension of their legacy rather than a person with needs and dreams. In return, Dorothy shared stories of her mother's sacrifices, of love shown through double shifts and hand-me-down clothes carefully mended to look special. She sounds remarkable, William said. She was, Dorothy nodded, grief still fresh though her mother had been gone 3 years. She taught me that wealth isn't about what you have, but about what you give. William's hand found hers in the darkness. I think I'm beginning to understand that. Neither acknowledged how their fingers intertwined, holding on perhaps longer than the moment required. Just as Dorothy began wondering if their pretend engagement might be awakening real feelings, the past crashed into their carefully constructed present. At a charity auction, a familiar voice called her name, one she hadn't heard in 6 years. Dorothy Andrews. What an unexpected surprise. She turned to find Anthony Melton, the man who had broken her heart and disappeared from her life without explanation. But more shocking than his presence was William's lack of surprise. "Cousin," William nodded coolly to Anthony. "I see you've met my fiancé." Dorothy's blood turned to ice. "Cousin." Anthony's smile turned predatory. "William didn't mention we have history." "That's interesting." The world tilted beneath Dorothy's feet. "You two are related." "You knew." "Dorothy," William began, but Anthony interrupted. "Of course he knew. William knows everything about everyone he deals with," Anthony said smoothly. "I'm surprised he didn't mention that the summer I spent slumming it with the baker's daughter was right after grandmother left him all her properties instead of splitting them between us." Dorothy looked at William, silently begging him to deny it. His tight expression told her everything. "This was never about Cheryl Peachy or business investors," she whispered, realization dawning. "This was about revenge against your cousin. And I was just convenient." "It's not that simple," William said, reaching for her. Dorothy stepped back, bumping into a waiter who spilled champagne down her dress, a fitting metaphor for how quickly her fairy tale was dissolving. "Actually, it is that simple," she said, voice breaking. "You used me. Just like Anthony did." She fled the gala, engagement ring cutting into her palm as she clutched it, ready to return the beautiful lie she'd been living. Behind her, William watched her go, unable to call after her with the truth. That yes, he had known who she was when he approached her, but somewhere along the way, the plan had changed. He had changed. But admitting that meant confronting feelings he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. So he let her go, retreating behind the emotional walls that had always kept him safe and alone. 3 weeks later, Dorothy received an ivory envelope in the mail. Inside was an invitation from Eternal Elegance. "Ms. Andrews, your presence is requested for a private bridal consultation." Dorothy almost threw it away. Since ending the fake engagement, she had thrown herself into saving her struggling bakery. Without William's promised financial support, she had taken a loan against her grandmother's wedding ring, the only thing of value she owned. Something about the invitation nagged at her, though. Why would Cheryl Peachy reach out now? Curiosity overpowered pride, and Dorothy found herself returning to the scene of her humiliation. The boutique was empty when she arrived except for Cheryl and, to Dorothy's shock, Linda Boucher, William's elegant ex-wife. "Look who's come crawling back," Linda smirked. The baker who thought she could be a billionaire's bride. Dorothy suddenly understood. This wasn't a consultation. It was an ambush designed to humiliate her again. "William told me all about your little arrangement," Linda continued. "How desperate you must have been to agree to such a thing. Did you really think someone like him could ever truly want someone like you?" 6 weeks ago, those words would have crushed Dorothy. Now, they simply clarified everything she'd been feeling since the charade ended. "You know what's interesting?" Dorothy said calmly. "William never once looked at me the way he looked at his buildings, as something to possess or show off. He looked at me like he was seeing something valuable that others had missed." Linda's perfectly composed face faltered slightly. "That's what bothers you, isn't it?" Dorothy continued. "Not that he was with me, but that maybe, just maybe, he saw something in me that he never saw in you." "How dare you?" Cheryl began, but Dorothy cut her off. "I don't belong here. Not because I'm not good enough, but because I don't want to be part of a world where people's worth is measured by their bank accounts instead of their character." Dorothy turned to leave, head held high, and found Barney Moore, William's head of security and closest friend, standing near the door. His usually impassive face showed something like respect. "Ms. Andrews," he nodded. "Mr. Hadlock has been looking for you." I have nothing to say to Mr. Hadlock, Dorothy replied, walking past him. Then perhaps you should listen to what he has to say, Barney suggested quietly. After he discovered what his cousin did, things have changed. Dorothy paused at the door. Some things can't be fixed with money or power, Mr. Moore. No, Barney agreed. Some things require courage. Something I haven't seen in Mr. Hadlock until recently. As Dorothy stepped onto the sidewalk, a familiar black car pulled up. The back door opened, and William Hadlock stepped out, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. Dorothy, he said, voice urgent. I need to tell you the truth. I already know the truth, she replied, starting to walk away. No, William moved to block her path. You know Anthony's version. You know my past. But you don't know what changed. Something in his voice, a vulnerability she'd never heard before, made Dorothy stop. When I approached you that day in your bakery, yes, I knew who you were. I knew about Anthony. I thought I was being strategic. William took a deep breath. What I didn't account for was you. The real you, not just Anthony's ex or the baker I remembered. Dorothy crossed her arms protectively. And who am I, according to you? You're the woman who sees stories in flavors. Who defends herself with grace instead of cruelty. Who taught me that preservation isn't just about buildings but about protecting what matters, including people. William's voice roughened. You're the first person who made me laugh genuinely in years. Who saw my loneliness and didn't use it against me. Dorothy's carefully constructed anger began to crumble. William. I let you believe Anthony because I was afraid, William admitted. Afraid that what I was feeling wasn't part of our arrangement. Afraid that if I told you the truth, you'd still walk away. Around them, pedestrians slowed, sensing the drama unfolding. From the boutique window, Linda and Cheryl watched with undisguised interest. So what is the truth? Dorothy asked quietly. William stepped closer. The truth is that somewhere between fake smiles and real conversations, I fell in love with you. Not as part of a plan or a business arrangement, but in spite of them. Dorothy stared at him, searching his face for any sign of calculation or manipulation. Instead, she found only raw honesty and something she'd never seen there before. Fear of rejection. I don't know if I can trust this, she whispered. Trust you? I'm not asking you to trust me right now, William said. I'm asking for a chance to earn that trust back. Day by day. No contracts, no arrangements. Just two people seeing where this goes. Dorothy thought of all the reasons to say no. The differences in their worlds. The pain of his deception. The risk of being hurt again. Then she thought of the man who defended her to his parents. Who remembered the flavors of her cake years later. Who saw beauty in broken things. I can't pick up where we left off, she said finally. Too much has happened. William nodded, accepting her decision despite the pain evident in his eyes. But, Dorothy continued, maybe we could start over. As ourselves this time. No pretending. Hope flickered across William's face. I'd like that very much. As they stood there on the sidewalk, beginning again with nothing but truth between them, Dorothy realized something important. Sometimes the journey to finding your worth means getting lost, being broken, and discovering that the pieces, when put back together, form something even more beautiful than before. 3 months later, Dorothy stood in front of Sweet Heritage, the historic building William had been secretly restoring for her, transformed into a combination bakery and event space. The grand opening had drawn food critics, local celebrities, and even William's parents, who were making awkward but genuine efforts to accept their son's choices. Dorothy had insisted on maintaining creative control, financing half the venture herself with profits from her suddenly booming wedding cake business. The space beautifully married her warmth with William's appreciation for historical details. As the last guests departed, William found Dorothy in the private apartment upstairs, a space that combined his aesthetic with her comfort in perfect harmony. You've created something extraordinary, he said, taking in the evidence that she'd been studying architectural preservation in her spare time. We did, Dorothy corrected him. It takes both of us, your vision and my heart. William smiled, the expression now coming easily to him. Speaking of both of us. He knelt before her, but instead of the massive diamond one might expect from a billionaire, he held out a simple band inlaid with amber. The color reminded me of your eyes, he explained. And amber preserves moments in time, like the moment I realized I didn't want to pretend anymore. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. Is this a business proposition, Mr. Hadlock? The teasing question held their shared history. How far they'd come from that first arrangement. This is me asking if you'll build something real with me, William answered. Something that might need repair sometimes but will stand the test of time. Yes, Dorothy whispered, extending her hand. But on one condition. William raised an eyebrow. Name it. I get to make our wedding cake, she said with a smile. I wouldn't have it any other way. 6 months later, they married in the restored garden behind Sweet Heritage. Dorothy wore a dress of her own choosing, elegant but simple. William's parents sat in the back, still learning to accept his choices but making progress. Anthony, seeing their genuine connection, had begun his own journey toward redemption, sending a heartfelt letter of apology that Dorothy had cautiously accepted. Cheryl Peachy was noticeably absent, her boutique struggling after losing favor with William's social circle following the public scene outside her store. 1 year into their marriage, William had found balance between work and home, often working from a desk in Dorothy's kitchen while she experimented with new recipes. Dorothy's business thrived, and she'd started a program teaching baking to underprivileged youth. They weren't perfect, he still worked too much, she still sometimes felt insecure in his world. But they'd learned that love isn't about perfection but presence. About showing up even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. For their first anniversary, Dorothy created a special cake incorporating elements that symbolized their journey. A foundation of sturdy chocolate, his stability, layers of sweet vanilla, her warmth, unexpected hints of spice, their challenges, and delicate gold flakes, the beauty formed under pressure. As William tasted it, his eyes closed in appreciation. You've done it again, he murmured. Captured our story in flavors only you could create. Dorothy smiled, thinking how far they'd come from that humiliating moment in a bridal boutique. Some love stories take unexpected ingredients, she said softly. The trick is finding someone who appreciates the complex flavors. William squeezed her hand, and in that simple gesture was everything they'd built together. Trust, understanding, and a love worth returning for, even after humiliation. If you've ever felt out of place or been made to feel like you don't belong, remember Dorothy's journey. Sometimes the very qualities others mock are the ones that make you extraordinary in the right person's eyes. What would you fight for to be with the one you love? Share in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe to Genie Soul Stories for more tales that remind us all that love sees beyond surfaces to the true worth beneath.